All right. Hello. We are here today to talk about the effects of burnout. One of those things, I read an article the other day, and it was saying that in this period of COVID, burnout levels already for Americans were at an extremely high level. But there's kind of been this divide in, this period where some people have used this period as an opportunity to really kind of hit the reset button and take inventory of their lives, the things they're committed to, what they're doing. And they've started saying no to things, right, that really don't align with their values, that don't align with what brings them a lot of meaning and joy. But I think that's probably a smaller percentage than I wish it was. There is another percentage of the population, that the effects of burnout have only become magnified. And so I think where maybe they had certain outlets for sources of meaning in place, some of those things got shut down during the COVID. Sometimes, right, with taking care of kids and suddenly having to be an educator and a principal, like all these different roles, people are stretched thin, right? So we just wanted to talk about the effects of burnout and what you can do to rise above it, and essentially what's the solution to it. So, Mr. David Osk, what do you think about this topic of burnout? How would you define burnout?
I think on a general level, we can say I've got too much on my plate. I've said yes to too many things, and I'm just, I don't have any emotional or maybe even physical bandwidth left to continue. And at the same time, I think most people would say, when they think of the word burnout, they're actually thinking about a feeling. What am I feeling right now? And, it's like, I forget who said it, a friend of mine, he said something like, I just wanted to leave. I wanted to, get in my car, start driving. I think he even said, get on a ship and go out in the middle of the ocean and say, see you never. It's like, just like even some of the good stuff. It's like, I don't care. It's too much. So I think in general, it's an overwhelm.
I think there's an interesting phenomena that you mentioned there, right? In burnout, that what can happen sometimes is that the brain just gets kind of flooded, gets overwhelmed, right? And then that starts to affect the motivation center of the brain. And so we start to lose motivation to do things that normally bring us joy. And so we can sometimes lose, right, that sense of satisfaction or enjoyment in things that used to bring us great pleasure. Yeah. And that obviously can be problematic when that gets generalized, that really starts to create, psychological dysfunction. So what are some of the things that you either do to try and avoid burnout, or like, what are the biggest triggers for you, and recognizing when you're heading towards burnout, and what do you do to avoid that?
It's interesting. I feel like really from about Thanksgiving up until about last week, I didn't realize it, but I was getting there. Like, I had I had some things pop up, some musical gigs and various things that, of course, in general, I love saying yes to. But at the same time, I had a lot of other things going on in my business and, various other activities. And I was getting to that place where I just started to not really like anything, and I didn't feel present, and overwhelmed and fragmented and so on. So part of, I think, the start to kind of get back to center for me was a bit of self-awareness, right? It's just acknowledging, wait a second, the balance here is getting severely skewed, and the things that I would normally like take great pleasure in, I'm just kind of blowing past. And so really the self-awareness piece was kind of front and center as I dialed back into me,
Yeah, I remember a period of time where I just realized as people would ask me, hey, how are you doing? I was getting caught up with people. My answer to them was always some version of, oh, things are so busy, things are so chaotic, right? And I felt that sense. I felt like things were rushed, and I really wanted things to slow down. And so I started to just kind of ask myself, I said, whoa, let me hit the pause button. There's a friend you and I have that uses what I think is a great metaphor. He talks about this pond that he grew up near, and in this pond, right, it's these amazing, beautiful fish, these different colored fish in there. And when the pond is all calm and it's still, you can see completely clear, right? You can see with great detail everything that's in there and all the beauty that's in there. But you take a stick and you stir it up, right, the mud on the bottom, and suddenly it clouds everything, and you can't see even a centimeter, beyond the surface. Yeah. And to me, that's the way it feels when I start to get overwhelmed, right? It just feels like things are chaotic and they're sped up, and I can't see with clarity. and it just starts to really, I feel like, kind of this brain fog. And so that time when I recognized that, I was able to really hit and say, hey, am I doing things that are actually fulfilling, right? This busyness that I have that I was addicted to, right? Because anytime that I actually tried to slow down, I'd feel guilty. I had created almost an identity around this sense of busyness that I had to constantly be achieving, being productive. And yet somehow, despite all this busyness, I felt a deep emptiness within. Yeah. So when I started to dial in and say, all right, then what are the things that I actually want to be doing? How do I dial in my values? Things that we talk about all the time. Yeah. Right. And I'm going to keep saying them because they're so essential and so important. The more I keep refocusing on my values, those are the things that have the greatest importance and significance to me. And so when I'm thinking about them and I feel like I'm moving towards them, I feel stronger. I feel more hope, right? My life has more meaning. I start to feel more motivated. Yeah. So it's amazing the impact that has, right? On the motivation center of the brain, just psychologically in general. Yeah. And once I started to dial that in and I started thinking about what am I intrinsically motivated to do? Okay? What are those things that when I do it, it's self-reinforcing, right? The simple act of doing these things motivates me to do more. Yeah. And what's a great use of my strengths? And suddenly, within a very short period of time, I'd actually cut a bunch of stuff off of my to-do list. And yet, when people would ask me, how are you doing? The answer busy wasn't my answer, right? Well, suddenly I started to feel, man, I am excited. I'm working on this project. I'm meeting these people. I'm doing these things. So it completely shifted how I felt about the things I was committed to. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I want to revisit something you said with regards to kind of feeling guilty when the old pond is stirred up and there's no clarity, just too many particles, right? It's just too much going on. That overwhelm goes on. I tend to then look in the mirror, as it were, and say, what's wrong with you? Everything in your life is pretty smooth sailing here at this point. Not that I've been through some hard times, right? And I tend to kind of turn that on myself and then start reinforcing some of that negative, behavior or feedback or whatever that is. It's like, what's wrong with you? And to, just to tap the brakes, take a fresh look at things is so important, because when we get to that spot, and I'm starting not only not to like life, but I don't like me for a while, that's a tough place to be. And it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah. We've talked about that there's, you're essentially, you experience a series of feedback loops throughout the day, right? And at the genesis or the origin point for all feedback loops, starts with your understanding, a belief around yourself. I believe that I am, worthy and capable, whatever it might be. But, when you have a feeling, you start to feel overwhelmed, that can trigger beliefs around, oh no, right? I'm going to drop the ball. Things are getting to be too much. And all of a sudden it creates this feedback loop where you then react to that feeling. And then it creates a narrative. You remember other times that you felt. Yeah. And so it starts to create this really vicious cycle. And so I think it's really important in those times, if you can have the awareness, the mindfulness to recognize, oh, wait a minute, I recognize this feeling, right? I recognize what's going on. Let me recenter to a better belief. Some of the stuff that we work on is helping people to have short one sentence, identity statements, purpose statements. And then people put them up, right? Whether it's in index cards, on vision boards, so that when those feedback loops start, they're able to kind of exit out of the negative feedback loops. Right. And it's amazing, right? That the more positive states that we can create, start to feel motivated, start to feel happy, excited, positive anticipation. That's how you start to then create the psychological condition that leads to thriving. You start creating more momentum. It really is just about the ability. How do you stop the negative states and cycles, earlier on, so that you experience less of them? And how do you create more and more of the energy states or emotional states, right, that feed you, that keep you going? And if you can get that ratio where suddenly you're experiencing more of those positives and negatives, you'll start creating radical traction, and burnout will cease to be a thing for you. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. As you were saying that, I remember when I went through your course, one of the exercises, after a progression of, material, of course, is to write down a purpose statement. And even now, mine is to, whether in word, song, or action, inspire, and I love that word, others to become the most fulfilled, and I love that word full, right? And finest versions of themselves, shedding things that are just less than, right? It's, when I think of finest, I think of the word shine, right? Just they kind of shed some layers and they just begin to shine. And Or I forget who said it, Dallas Willard or somebody, that phrase, fully alive. It's just, it's so powerful. So what's fascinating is I notice that when I'm, now that I've done, that work, right, to get to that place where I have really, really clarity on my purpose and the language that inspires me, just to read that statement out loud, tends to bring the pendulum back. And this idea of, I don't know, in some ways I feel like the, overwhelm, being burned out, that kind of stuff. What is it? It's just a barometer, really, that something is off kilter, and then we need to course correct. Yep. And I don't think there's anybody, alive that's not been there, and maybe there for a long season, boy, and you sure don't want to stay there, because you can really get in a bad way if that's the case. But I just love this idea of course correcting to clarity, to a vocabulary that I have chosen. Those things I like to say, you've heard me say this, the things that give my goosebumps, right? It's like, man, that stuff that lights me up, that I want to be about, that I want to marinate in, that the conversations I want to have, the impact that I want to have, the times of solitude that I want to enjoy, that kind of stuff. It brings those things into clear focus.
Yeah. I love, we talk about really trying to help with the 5 C's, right? Help people get clarity. When you have clarity, you know exactly what's important, right? You know what's expected of you. You know that you can absolutely meet those expectations or even exceed them. And it's doing something you enjoy, right? Yeah. More often than not, success is inevitable with that, right? The other C, certainty. How do you base a few things that to be true about yourself, right? Have convictions and truths that you can anchor your identity, you can anchor your actions and motivation to, so that regardless of the external uncertainty, ambiguity, chaos that's going on, you're able to stay totally centered, right, rooted and calm in the midst of the storm. The third one we create is around conviction, and that's really just turning certainty into powerful action statements, into goals, so that there's conviction behind your actions. Right. Then we look at trying to create consistency. And I think that's where a lot of people struggle, right? That there's a sense of, man, some days I feel like I'm on fire. I feel like I hit flow state, but I don't know how to recapture that the next day. I kind of almost got there by accident, right? I kind of just wandered my way into it. But when you start to really understand what lights you up, and you start to have a plan of action, self-strategy, right, that is rooted to, again, the clarity, certainty, conviction, suddenly you're going to create consistency that is amazing. And the last one being coherence. It's just, how do you create that connection between your thoughts, your beliefs, your head, your heart, and kind of, the spirit, the faith, for me, the soul. And when you're able to align those things, right, so that my beliefs and my feelings and my faith are all aligned, my values, my virtues, all those things, man, the power you will have behind what you're doing will just be transcendent. So, and I created this largely because of my own struggles. If you think about for a moment, well-being on a spectrum from a -10 to a +10, for a long season of life, I was really suffering and existed, further on the minus side of the spectrum than, I'd certainly like to acknowledge. But after I went through a lot of counseling and started doing a lot of exercises and tried to do a lot of healing, I had gotten myself at least to maybe occasionally going slightly into the minus side, but I never seemed to go much higher than a +2, +3. I was kind of stuck right in between like a +2 and a -2. I didn't know how to make that leap into consistently being at like a +5 or above, right? And very rarely ever going below a +5. Right. Yeah. And so that's when I started looking at people that were living life at a consistently like in flow state, right? They seem to always be, they love the life that they live. They're living with radical autonomy and freedom. And I started to say, well, what in the world are they doing? And what can I learn from that and deconstruct and put together? And I figured these were the consistent patterns that those people were doing, right? They were focused on their values. They did things because they were intrinsically motivated, right? And they used their strengths in ways that had maximum impact. When you line those things up, it certainly has catapulted me forward into the farthest on the plus side of that spectrum that I've certainly ever experienced. And I think the people we're working with are experiencing the same thing. Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, you often talk about this idea of predetermining, and I was actually talking to another group today using that same language, and I think that if we haven't predetermined, those things were the things that we love, the things we're going to say yes to, no to, things that cause our energy to rise. If that's not a predetermined position or thought or framework that we're going to filter the rest of our life through, a decision matrix, as it were, good luck. And I think the proof is in the pudding, right? I noticed that I lived much of my life just kind of chasing stuff, chasing fulfillment, wanting success, as it were, to become somebody, or at least not be a nobody, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Talk about burnout. I mean, I was saying
Yeah.
yes to absolutely everything because I'm just hoping something would stick, right? But what I didn't do then is to do the deep work that, there's just self-awareness piece to help me understand, who I was. And I want to make another distinction here. I love this idea about, you mentioned the word flow state, or, they call it the zone, or probably some other language to describe that. But, a lot of people would say, I know 3 people in my life that I've witnessed in flow state. They seem to be, well, it's that one person. I remember that one teacher, that one, that exemplar, that language that you use, right? And they think that, well, somehow they're different, right? Well, no, I can't find that. Yeah. And what's fascinating is, in the last couple of years, I mean, I think I've gone from a place of a lot of fragmentation to a place of deeper peace. But now, like you mentioned, that spectrum of, the positive side, 1 to 5, 5 to 10, I'm hanging out in that 4, 5, and 6 area, right? I mean, I can't be a 10 all the time. It's kind of that 80-20 rule. But I'm hanging out in that middle sense of flow state for me that feels so good. I'm not necessarily really haven't been, for heaven's sakes, it's Monday, and, thank God it's Friday, that kind of thing.
Yep.
I feel very present on Monday mornings and on Sunday afternoons. And again, 80-20, right? We're human. So I don't want to paint some silly picture, but I'll be honest, I didn't think that was even possible. I thought it was.
Yeah, people feel that around you, right? I mean, I get feedback, right, on people's experience with you, right? And your impact and your influence really is really powerful. Not to say that you didn't have that before, but I mean, there's no doubt that it seems like you are consistently, operating at a very high level. If we're looking to kind of have more of those peak level experiences, if there's another degree higher than this for David Osk, look out, world. So
well, and even this week, like I had a coach that I met with on Monday, and I was in kind of a tough spot, a lot of overwhelmed brain fog and that kind of stuff. But what's really great though is that the flow state, if you will, or the plus side, requires that. So what I'm learning now is
that's a good point.
Yeah, I don't despise those times anymore. I'm just curious about them, right? I'm like, I'm not so judgmental anymore about, well, somehow, David Osk, you're not getting it, that kind of thing. I'm like, oh, this is interesting. Why am I feeling like this? Yeah. And then that permission, my friend Cindy uses that word permission a lot. You just get to gently walk in, into a different, room and be like, oh, okay. Yeah, this feels better when I say these things and do these things and act in this way and say yes to these types of things and no to these types of things. I feel like I come alive. I mean, it's powerful.
It's a great distinction, right? And I want to make sure, as you're pointing out, as I certainly will acknowledge too, this being at a higher state certainly does not protect you, right, from having moments of self-doubt, right, getting caught in those cycles. But I think the difference, right, for the people that I studied, and certainly what I'm experiencing more of now, and I certainly didn't have at any other point in my life, is I just don't hang out, right? As I start to feel myself going into a vicious cycle, and I start going in, right, I know how to exit out of it. I know how to get into, I acknowledge the feeling, and I don't start to beat myself up and feel guilty and do the self-judgment. So I just do a lot less of that. And I recognize, right, that, like you said, that a lot of times you can't build resilience without adversity, right? You don't know the experience of joy and success without having to go through some failures. And so I start to appreciate, right, that I'm in a crucible. There's a moment, right, where this is going to make me stronger going through this. But the key is, how do I learn? How do I get back into, how do I use this to, again, catapult myself into a higher state? And so I think, having a language for that, having tools, and we know that a big part of the burnout is this phenomena of feeling ineffective, right? There's some good research on this. And so it's one thing when you're feeling busy and you're feeling, but when you feel busy and you feel productive, right? You feel like the things you're doing are having impact. That's part of the thing, is it creates a higher state, right? You start to feel fulfilled. You start to feel, the impact, the joy of having impact in whatever it is that you're doing. But when you feel like you're just, a hamster on a wheel, that phenomena, There's a lot of people out there, right?
Yeah.
There was a great study on autonomy that was looking at how many people thought their life was autonomous. And this was on like, study of 15,000 people. And it was like roughly 20% of the people were surveyed felt like their life, reflected autonomy, that it was a byproduct of choices that were important to them. They were living the life they wanted to live, right? So that meant 80% of the people felt, at least like in some area, if not all areas of life, they were stuck doing things that didn't really matter to them, right? They're kind of going through the motions and probably feeling really dissatisfied in doing it. And so, I think this is a phenomenon that's probably pretty relevant to a large population. And
So
you don't have to stay there anymore. We want to make sure that message gets out.
oh man, I would actually love, based on that study, I'd like to just throw a challenge out to our listeners here too, is send us a message, put something in the chat box, or, send us a message privately. Let us know, what's the percentage for you? Is it 80 or 20? And, do you feel like you're living, that autonomy piece, right? I'm choosing, or do I feel trapped? That clear distinction of, I have agency, I have, the ability to make decisions that do matter to me, or do I feel really trapped here? And again, I think that starts with the predetermining, what are those things that are valuable to you? We often use the term core values, right? What do you value in your core that's different from the person next to you? And when you start to identify those things, it's amazing what starts bubbling up that you start to, get clarity on.
And I love, again, that core value, right? And what is it that resonates or translates into all areas of life? I think there was a time, right, where as I was trying to bust through that, kind of the limitations of my emotional experiences, trying to get to a higher state, that I really tried to just achieve my way there, right? So I just figured if I worked hard enough and I had enough successes and achievements, that was the key to getting there. However, right, like I was just saying yes to everything. I wanted to, and so ultimately I was, having no bandwidth left for anything. Yeah. I wasn't feeling effective in multiple areas because I was trying to juggle too many things, right? And achievements, I don't think the way to necessarily get there. Now, achieving the right types of things, sure, that can be impactful. But the problem with trying to make your identity dependent on achievements is you're essentially creating a dependency on dopamine hits, right? So maybe you set a big goal, or you're trying to make more money, and you get that thing. You get a nice hit of dopamine, makes you feel wonderful. But what happens if that dopamine wears off, right? If you don't have a strong sense of identity beyond that, then the thing is you're going to keep looking back. Well, I need more, I need more, I need more. And there is no amount of achievement or dopamine that ultimately is going to fill that hole inside, right? So it creates a very dissatisfying cycle, and you become very selfish, right? Because it's all about, I need more of this to feel good. You need something more substantive, right, to be able to hold you up. And I think those values are a great place to start.
Love that. Love that. So, and I think when you the dopamine hits, the achievements and so on, one thing that has really shifted in my heart, for myself, is when I lay my head down at night, I want to have joy in that day. I don't want to pin it on something 2 months from now or a week from now. It's not that we can't have goals and that kind of stuff, but did I show up in a way today that was meaningful to me? Did I interact with the people that I love, right? Did I have an impact on them, and also allow them to have an impact on me in a way that was meaningful, right? It's that give and take. And it's amazing, the number of times in the last few years I've been laying down my put my head on my pillow at night, and I'm like, yep, that happened today. And it felt really good to be alive today. And tomorrow will take care of itself, but today was a great day.
Yeah. And I can remember a season, right, where at nighttime I'd put my head down, hoping to go to bed, right? And the wheels of rumination, right, and it would kick on. And who knows, it could be anywhere from 30 minutes to 2 hours to, I'm not sleeping tonight. Yeah. Right? So I know very much that feeling of restlessness, right? I know that feeling of fatigue. I know that feeling of, God, what do I need to do tomorrow? Am I going to be able to handle this? That feeling of being overwhelmed. I know what it's like to have my internal environment essentially feel like a battle, right, within itself. The constant overthinking, overanalyzing, desire to be perfect. And I know what it's like now, for the most part, that inner state is one of peace, right? Now, again, those old voices try and pop in, and they come in every once in a while. But by and large, at the end of the day, like I love being inside my own head. I love my own life experience. My kids, a lot of times when it comes around on Monday, they're like, Dad, can you just not go to work this week? and I get, right, we have so much fun on the weekends, and it's a part of me really appreciates, but I try and share with them, I love what I do for work, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's important for us to have, kind of meaning, to do things that are meaningful, to feel like we're having impact on the world.
Love
I
that.
want to set the model. I want to set the example for you guys, right? That you can do work, and that you have purpose. I have purpose here as a dad for sure. And that's really, it even transcends what I do for work. But I kind of need to do well at work to be able to, be the dad that I want to be for them as well.
Yeah.
So
Great word. Great word.
As we're kind of wrapping up here on burnout, like what I don't know, what are some of the final statements? I don't know if it's just summarizing some of the things that we talked about today, or if there's something that you feel like hasn't been said yet. But I don't know, what would you like to say as we're kind of wrapping up this talk on burnout?
Yeah, I think, boy, we can relate, right? And if you're in that spot, or your spouse or kids or whoever, you don't have to stay there. It's not the way life needs to be lived, and you need to course correct. But it starts with, looking in here and deciding what is it that I'm valuing today. What am I gonna, creating that lens or that filter that you're gonna say yes and no to things, and then be really patient with yourself. That process takes time. Show yourself a ton of grace as you just start to assimilate some of the new language and the new freedom, really, the new vocabulary that describes you. And then, and if that's where you are, reach out to us, let us know how we can help you, and be honored to walk with you.
Yeah. I'm certainly intrinsically motivated, right? Help people to bust through some of these ceilings.
Yeah.
Again, I know what it's like to feel stuck. Like I'm just kind of running in mud. It's not a particularly fun place to be, right? And I know I started to say something about core values that will be my final piece. Just that when we start to dial in, understanding what really matters most to us, and something that is core to just who we are, right? In all areas, that was huge for me, right? Instead, I often felt fragmented. I felt like I was trying to achieve and be one person at work, right? And then I'd come home and it was like I was trying to put on a new mask. And then, I'd go to church on the weekend. So I had all these different kind of masks that I wore. And man, is that just tiring. It really is. I felt like I was constantly trying to quickly shift. And when I started to figure out, no, this is just what's important to me, and this is who I am. These are defining principles that guide me. This is how I want to treat people. And it allowed me very easily to kind of come home from work and to go into dad mode, into husband mode, right?
And real quick, as you're saying that, here's what I'm kind of realizing, is you just said that the shift, when you realize that stuff, you stop thinking about yourself, as often. And the shift actually, the shift actually becomes outward focused. So when you walk into all like those places that you mentioned, you're not looking for anything. You're like, man, what kind of David Osk, shaped dent can I have in this room, right? This is going to be fun because it's fun to be me. It's a complete paradigm shift. But if you don't realize that you're constantly self-focused in a way that is, I don't know, borderline debilitating, you may not even realize that it's even possible to walk into a room and just be like, all right, let's go here. This is great. You're like, who needs a helping hand? Who needs a hug? I mean, it's like, what's up? And as opposed to feeling empty. So
yeah, it's really the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? I mean, that's where you start to exist, at the very top of the pyramid. And so, and that's the people that I studied and the people I looked at that seemed to just have, my grandpa was one of them. There's a variety of others. And some of these people have now are deceased, but man, their energy, right, all the way up into their late 80s, like they were outpacing, me when I was in my, early 20s and 30s. And so it was a sense you could just see, right? That's what happens when you really love the life that you live, right? And you love the relationships you're building and things like that. And so, it allows you, when you're existing on a consistently positive state, right, your needs are taken care of. So like you said, you start to feel secure enough where it's like, now how can I impact others? What can I do to serve others, right? Your ego is not getting in the way. You're able to really be outwardly focused. So you can be the most generous, impactful version of yourself.
And like you said, we all know people who operate like that, right?
Yeah.
And we're like, they're different. They're generous of spirit. So what do they have? I mean, we know those people.
Yeah. And when you start to figure out your version of that, it gets really fun. So, well, we hope obviously people got, real value out of this. I think this is an important topic. So, if anybody has suggestions too for other topics that we feel like we need to be talking about, I love going into research and kind of dig into my bag of tools to talk about, how we can create psychological, exercises, interventions, responses, strategies, to overcome things that tend to get in our way of us being who we're capable and who we're designed to be. So,
Great word.
All right.
Great word. Thanks.